Imagine a city, once full of life, now just a smoking ruin. The sky is black with smoke, the streets are shattered, and in the rubble, one of the most brutal battles in human history is about to reach its turning point. This was Stalingrad. And let's just start with a number that's, well, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. 2 million. That's the estimated number of casualties, soldiers and civilians, from this one single battle. Just staggering. So a number that big just begs the question, right? How on earth did what was arguably the world's most powerful, most advanced army get itself completely surrounded and then just annihilated in one city? That's what we're going to break down. But before we can understand the collapse, you have to understand just how high they were flying. Because before Stalingrad, the German war machine seemed, for all intents and purposes, absolutely unstoppable. I mean, the scale of their success was just breathtaking. By 1941, they'd steamrolled much of Europe. France had fallen, and during Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, they pushed hundreds and hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. The Soviet army was getting hammered. Seriously, at that moment, Germany looked invincible. But then, all that focus, all that power, got aimed at one specific city. A city that was about to become a fortress, not because it was built that way, but because of its own destruction. So why this one city? What was so special about Stalingrad? Well, it was really a trifecta of strategic goals. First, you had the symbolism. Taking a city named after Stalin himself, that would be a huge blow to Soviet morale. Second, logistics. It would cut off critical supply routes for the Soviets. And third, and this is a big one, resources. It was the gateway to the Caucasus oil fields, and without that oil, Germany's whole war machine would eventually just grind to a halt. And here's where we see one of the great, brutal ironies of the battle. The Germans started with this massive bombing campaign to just flatten the city. But in doing so, they accidentally created their own worst nightmare. The streets got clogged with rubble, so their own tanks couldn't move effectively. And that very same rubble, it turned the city into a perfect, ready-made fortress for the Soviet defenders. This is the moment where the whole war on the Eastern Front just fundamentally changes. Forget open fields and sweeping advances. This was the beginning of what the German soldiers themselves called the Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. You see, Germany's army was built for speed, for maneuver, for tanks chewing up kilometers of open ground. But in Stalingrad, all those advantages went right out the window. This became a brutal war of attrition. It wasn't about tanks, it was about snipers and small infantry groups. Victory wasn't measured in kilometers, it was measured in a few meters, a single building, or even just one room. This quote from the time just says it all, doesn't it? It was this claustrophobic, terrifying meat grinder, where the front line could literally be the wall between you and the enemy. But the room-to-room fighting wasn't even their biggest problem. The deeper the Germans pushed into the Soviet Union, the more they exposed their greatest weakness, their true Achilles heel, logistics. Now, to really get what went wrong, you gotta understand what a supply line is. It's not glamorous, but it is everything. Think of it like an army's umbilical cord. It's the lifeline that pumps in everything a soldier needs to survive and fight: food, ammo, fuel, even winter coats. You cut that line, the army dies. It's as simple as that. And that line was about to be put to the test when the famous Russian winter showed up. We're talking temperatures plunging to 30 degrees below Celsius. Now, the Soviets were used to this, but the German soldiers were absolutely not. Their already strained supply lines just couldn't deliver the right winter gear. Soldiers started freezing to death in their positions. Their weapons were jamming. The whole advance just stalled out in the cold. The Soviets saw this. They saw this weakness, this vulnerability. And they didn't just dig in and defend. Oh no, they planned a massive, brilliant counterattack, a giant steel trap that was designed to snap shut right on Germany's weak point. It was called Operation Uranus, and in November of 1942, they sprang the trap. After secretly gathering enormous armies, they launched this huge two-pronged attack. The two pincers met behind the German Sixth Army, closing the circle. And just like that, their lifeline, their supply line, was totally and completely cut. And suddenly, almost 300,000 men were caught. The situation turned desperate, fast. There was no food. Promised airlifts couldn't get through. They started running out of ammunition. There were no supplies. And when their commander pleaded with Hitler for permission to try and break out of the encirclement, the answer was no.
He ordered them to stand their ground and fight to the last man. There would be no escape.
What happened next wasn't just a defeat. It was the complete and utter annihilation of an entire army. This right here, this was the moment the tide of World War II on the Eastern Front finally, truly began to turn.
And the end came shockingly fast. In November 42, the trap is sprung. By December, Hitler has forbidden any attempt to escape. And by the end of January 1943, starving, frozen, and completely out of options, Commander Paulus surrenders what's left of his army.
The scale of the disaster for Germany was just unprecedented. Over 300,000 soldiers in their elite 6th Army were lost, killed, captured, or wounded. It was a wound that the German war machine would never, ever fully recover from.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this horror? It's a lesson as old as war itself, just relearned in the most brutal way imaginable. And it's this: an army, no matter how powerful or advanced, is only as strong as its supply lines. Period.
And that kind of leaves us with a fascinating question for today. Stalingrad proved that a determined defender could turn a ruined city into the ultimate equalizer, neutralizing a technologically superior enemy. So it makes you wonder, in our modern age of drones, satellites, and precision weapons, are cities still the great equalizer in warfare?